top of the day news at higher education institutions. What strategies and activities are higher education institutions implementing in support services that serve underrepresented minoritized students with their racial identity to enhance their sense of belonging? Will this impact their sense of otherness? For decades, our underrepresented minoritized students have dealt with this. How can we assist with the changes needed to address this barrier that our students face? Stay tuned for more to come.
Reporting on the Latino male perspective. Because Hispanics are the fastest growing ethnic minority, it is critical that we are given the same opportunities in higher education as all other groups. According to the 2017 census, the two largest Hispanic subgroups are Mexican Americans and Puerto Ricans. According to the American Council on Education, in 2017, 11.5% of Hispanic males graduated from college, in comparison to white males at 23.6% and African American males at 15.2%. Why are Latino males graduating from college at lower rates than other male groups? According to our research, social factors that contribute to ethnic, racial identity and sense of belonging include spirituality, language, gender, socioeconomic, where one grows up, and the type of neighborhood school attended. Latinos become more hyper-aware and more hypersensitive of their ethnicity and cultural identity in their first year of college. Latino students feel like they do not fit in at their college campus, especially if there was no inclusive environment or if there's a hostile environment with daily microaggressions by peers and professors. Hispanic serving institutions and other universities need to do more to help Latino students feel a strong sense of identity and belonging more than ever before by having more group associations, having more extracurricular activities, having a dedicated center for Latino students, having more positive interactions with college staff, professors speaking Spanish, and also having professors do cultural proficiency and anti-racist training. My story: I came from South Texas, a sheltered environment. I only spoke Spanish. Basically, I lived in a bubble. In 1991, I left the bubble and came to Austin, to a small private university at St. Edwards, with rich students from all over the U.S. and other parts of the world. I was having an identity, ethnic identity crisis. Was I Hispanic, Latino, Chicano, Mexican American? I was English as a second language learner, and I was economically disadvantaged, and I was having a hard time in college in my first year. I almost dropped out of college, but I was able to build relationships with my professors, and that helped a lot. Many of my peers dropped out. At the end, I was successful.
Good evening, I am Kayla Harjo, and I am here to discuss some of the issues in the history related to Native American students within a higher education system. Native American students were forced into assimilation, and they were forced into an education system that promoted that Christianity lifestyle. Many Native students were taken from their families and forced into these institutions that were, quote, kill the Indian and save the man. And so when you're looking at removing that identity piece from these Native students, they felt traumatized, and 9 out of 10 of those students were traumatized by that boarding school experience. And so as generations continue to come along, we find that more and more Native students have that hatred towards the Western education system. And so education isn't really a true value for those students. And so what we have noticed is that there's Native American students among our background. We are one of the lowest performing students within high school and post-secondary education institutions, meaning that we're barely making it through high school. Roughly 42% of us graduate high school. And that means that number even dwindles down as we transition into that post-secondary. So we're asking ourselves, well, why is it so low? What can we do for those students who do make it into those post-secondary institutions? And so the issue at hand is, how do we give those students that sense of belonging once they get to that institution? Well, one thing is we make sure we provide our staff with that cultural responsive training so that they understand that their Native students are coming from a different lifestyle as opposed to many other ethnic background students. Native students are more culturally aware of who they are most of the time. And so with that, Native peoples are always about relationships. They want to foster that family environment within a campus community, and they want to feel that sense of belonging. And so many institutions throughout the state of Oklahoma and throughout the United States are slowly starting to implement and really hone in on that diversity and inclusion piece and making sure all students are felt welcome, and not just, as an office to say, yes, we make them feel welcome, but to also make sure that we're promoting who they are and making sure we're providing opportunities for them to learn who they are. My recommendations for some of the things moving forward is to make sure that we're hosting, culturally responsive engagements for students, and maybe implementing into American Indian projects within the campus and in the institution.
Good evening, classmates. This is Lincoln Wolf, and I'm reporting to you tonight on the community college front. I'm going to talk to you tonight about the experience of Black men entering predominantly white institutions of higher education, and how the labels placed on Black men have a systemic bearing on their success in college. In 2015, Barber talked about the experience of Black men who enter predominantly white institutions and how they are viewed through the framework of individual disparities and deficits, rather than through the framework of outcomes produced by structural and social inequalities and inequities, and how leaders and institutions tend to position Black men close to white-centric supports with little acknowledgement of cultural practices that have shaped those disparities. Barber goes on to point out that this is particularly troublesome at community colleges, given the role that these institutions play as post-secondary entry points for Black men and as a primary path of access for students of color. Huey in 2018 talked about the tokenization of Black men in academic settings at predominantly white institutions, how they're recruited for committee work, how they are tapped sometimes to act almost as a barometer of race relations on campus, and how they can be used as a mouthpiece to endorse and perpetuate inequitable strategies that serve white students and faculty interests primarily. They are pigeonholed into providing diversity and equity viewpoint, but limited or excluded from the benefits of full acceptance and participation. When it comes to data, leaders often rely more on quantitative than qualitative data to tell the story of the Black experience. Barber in 2015 talked about this focus on quantitative measures and how it misses opportunities to reduce systemic origins of inequality for Black men attending community colleges. And Harrison Wood in 2013 wrote, "Qualitative research can illuminate how men of color experience community colleges, why notable trends and outcomes and inequities persist, and what meanings these students derive from their experience." In 2018, Lee wrote how critical race theory can be used to attack systemic racism at predominantly white institutions. Using a three-pronged approach, using affirmation, support, and advocacy, critical race theory can be used to attack barriers of racism by creating a sense of mattering and belonging, by providing support in need, but most importantly, by advocating for change. When we see that our students are encountering racist policies and barriers, advocating for the removal of those barriers. This is Lincoln Wolf, signing off on the community college front.
Mixed race and multiracial are terms used to identify individuals from two or more races. Mixed race infers that the racial identities of individuals are combined to make one, while multiracial acknowledges the different parts of an individual's racial makeup. Therefore, multiracial is the preferred term in literature. These multiple races allows a person's identity to be fluid. This fluidity, however, has consequences. It can cause a person to feel excluded due to not being enough of one race or the other. They face microaggressions from individuals from a monoracial mindset. For example, they may not be white enough to be in the white group or Black enough to be in the Black group. But we want to encourage our audience to think beyond Black and white multiracial identity. Multiracial spans beyond the combination of these two races. Multiracial individuals have no shared identified culture or history, and therefore have unique challenges in identity development and the feeling of acceptance. Inclusivity of multiracial students may destabilize monoracial paradigms and endanger the progress made by the Black and Latino communities, but it must be discussed in higher education. Multiracial students that are not of white, black, or Hispanic origin have no formal or informal congregation space in higher institutions. Support groups or organizations for multicultural students should be considered. Institutions must develop partnerships with multiracial organizations to educate students, staff, faculty, and administrators to serve the growing multiracial student population.
Thank you for joining us. Black women in higher education serve as a double minority, and it becomes more and more apparent as they continue to matriculate. For the Black women who attend predominantly white institutions, there are specific resources provided to them to aid in their quest in obtaining their degree. And in many cases, this support provided to them is different from what is needed for their success. Comparing the Black woman experience in a predominantly white institution versus a historically Black college, there's a sense of support already ingrained in the school system. In a study by Andrea Dominguez, key support systems were mentioned, these being mentorship support, family, and romantic relationships. In addition to these lines of support, there are pivotal experiences for Black women that they are feeling each and every day in their collegiate time. Stereotyping, microaggressions, racial and generalized expectations, to name a few. Linking our research, we see the ways in which alleviating these problems and aiding in the likelihood of achievement for students experiencing this are through mentorship, mothering, allyship through white peers, and social networking organizations. With the continued success of the aforementioned support, they can continue to grow. When we look at Black women experiences, we cannot allow the first generation experience to go unnoticed. 42% of Black college students are first generation, and we know the majority of Black college students are women. Support needed on a first generation basis that will directly impact the Black women are the lack of support from peers and faculty. When targeted support is implemented, belonging increase. As it stands, Black women represent over 50% of the population to receive post-secondary degrees. Through the research focusing on more peer-based ally programming and structured mentoring between students and leaders both on campus and through faculty in schools can aid in the Black woman's overall experience and allow for a stronger sense of involvement. Thank you.
For decades and nearly a century, Latinas have increased their enrollment in higher education institutions, but their attainment rates reflect a serious decline. Latinas have long identified as different subcategories within the term Latina. Latina is an all-encompassing word that incorporates anyone of Spanish descent. Therefore, they could identify as Mexicans, Mexican Americans, Chicanas, Tejanas, Colombianas, Boricuanas, Cubanas, Dominicanas, Panameñas, Salvadoreñas, Nicaragüeñas, Argentinas, Brasileñas, y mucho más, or much more. Oftentimes, their identity is based on their neighborhoods and different cultures that they were raised by. Their family is a big aspect of their self-identity. Latinas assimilate in their higher education institution life by joining culture group programs that help them adjust and have a sense of belonging. Even with these programs at higher education institutions, the data reflects that in 2017, only 12.9% of Latinas enrolled attained a bachelor's degree, and the number significantly dropped for a master's and doctoral degree. Their attainment rates are lower than any other underrepresented minoritized female student population, yet their enrollment numbers lead the way and then sharply decline. Could their sense of belonging and otherness be affected by the lack of support services from their higher education institution administration? Do they see themselves in the faces they see from their leadership and educators? It is apparent there is a problem, and according to various researchers, although higher education institutions implemented diversity programs and recruited diverse student populations, their faculty and administration continue to lack in diversity. The higher education institutions are still very reflective of the predominantly white male administration and faculty. Other studies at Hispanic-serving institutions also reflect that they have a higher percentage of graduating Latinas. Their programs are focused on mentorship and representation. So it appears that a good solution for helping Latinas feel a sense of belonging and addressing their sense of otherness is through representation at their higher education institutions. The implementation of extracurricular cultural programs are helpful and great, but having representation in their administration, educators, and mentors play a big role in Latina attainment rates.